My parents were born in the 20s. My mom and dad were both born in America. And in during the Great Depression, my dad was um, moved out of his house because his parents couldn't afford to care for such a large family, and he moved in on a farm with his aunt and uncle. And at the time he was 18, he went from the farm to fight in World War II. He got a Bronze Star in the war, so he was directly involved in battle. And when he came home, he was in his early 20s, basically. Had to come home in 45 and find a job, support his new wife and young son, and then I came along. So about 8 years after the war, I was born, and my dad was, I believe he was, like everyone, he was negatively affected by the war, but I think he was traumatized pretty thoroughly coming from a farm to being thrown onto a battlefield in Europe where he's got to kill other men. Um, I don't believe you come back from that like the same farm kid that you were when you left. No, they did not have a good marriage. I don't think my mom could appreciate the level of damage that my dad experienced during the war, and she turned to what was prescribed at the time, Valium, back in the 50s and 60s. I think that was a pretty heavy drug that they turned to, and she developed a habit with that. I had both sets of grandparents. My mother's parents lived right across the street from us when I was a child, up until the time I was about 7. And as I said, my grandfather was a practicing alcoholic. My grandmother died very young, probably 56 years old. Um, and my father's parents, I didn't know nearly as well. They lived within a half hour away, but we didn't visit them on a daily basis like I did with my other grandparents because they lived right across the street. Um, my grandmother on my father's side was part Cherokee Indian. I'm not sure if she was half or not. And my grandfather, I believe, was from Europe. When I was very young, like 8 or 9 years old, there was a park next to my house where they had sponsored arts and crafts and activities for young kids. And I would go over there and spend my summers doing arts and crafts, making baskets or painting little plaster statues or something. And that was probably around the time that I was getting some positive feedback about my talents as an artist, um, which garnered me some attention, which was lacking in my family. So I probably appreciated that and fed on it, as well as enjoying creating artwork. But then all through grade school and high school, I was involved in arts, and it just seemed to be the natural thing for me to become an artist. Even back in high school, that's what I wanted to be. Um, then I got married about 27 and was going to be a father at 28. So I needed a job that produced steady income, not just selling a painting once in a while, and became an illustrator for Osco Drug, and then moved over to True Value Hardware and was an illustrator for them at their world headquarters. So I was an illustration artist drawing products in newspaper ads and stuff like that for about 20 years or so. And got on my own and tried pottery and stuff like that. But I've always pretty much wanted to be an artist. That's a good question for me because I am a hoarder. I had a pole building and a large rental unit and a house just full of junk. As an artist, I would use some of the junk in my assemblages. So that was one reason I collected a lot of junk. When I went from being an illustrator, I moved to Michigan and started dabbling in like flea market sales and vendor sales, antique store kind of stuff. So that also helped me collect a bunch of junk. And then when I had the stroke, my kids wanted me to live closer to them in Wisconsin. They got me this house here, which meant that I have a house, a storage building, and a pole building full of junk that has to be emptied. So I've been spending the past year just trying to get rid of junk. And unloading junk is twice as hard as amassing it. You can get junk anywhere at any time for any price, but getting rid of it is really a challenge when you've got 30 years worth of junk to unload in a year's time. So I've been donating a lot of stuff, having small yard sales, trying to get rid of stuff that way. I plan on having a big estate sale and just flush everything out. Because all this time I've been collecting this stuff and saving it up, knowing that some of the things I collected would increase in value. Like I buy t-shirts that might be $500 rock concert t-shirts or something like that. Or I try to invest in books that might have an author's signature in it or something. I was collecting these things and thinking this is like an inheritance for my kids, because if it's valuable now, it'll be twice as valuable. Well, they're not interested in selling on eBay. They don't want my crap. They said they would throw a match in the building and let it all burn if I died, which is one way of taking care of it. But I'm getting rid of things, giving them away, or selling them, or throwing them out. And I realized after all these years that my life would have been so much simpler had I kept my possessions few. I would have been much more mobile. I could have moved around a lot easier without worrying about being chained down to this location because I've got a storage building that's full of crap. So that's the lesson I've learned. If I could do it all again, I would try to go through life with all of my possessions that could fit inside of a van, so that when it's time to pack up and move, it would be an easy